Okay, a very warm welcome to everyone. Welcome back to session 2 of the fourth and final semester of Core Enaction at Mind and Life Europe. I'm really happy to see everyone once again in the live Zoom room. And for those of us joining on the YouTube channel, welcome back as well. We're happy to have you following either during the live stream or after the live session. So this evening, this is the first session, we're really going to be diving into the practices, the intersubjective practices that we are putting into conversation with participatory sense making. And so this session is titled Thinking Divergently. So focusing on neurodiversity and divergence in conversation with participatory sense making. So the session will be structured slightly differently from the last session, and I think our hosts this evening, Hannah de Jager and Letitia Renaud, will be saying a few words about that. So at this point, I will say no more, and I'm happy to pass the baton to Hannah de Jager to get us started this evening.
Hello, welcome everybody to the second session. Unmute. I should unmute. No. Yes, I'm unmuted. Sorry. Yes, warm welcome to everybody tonight or today, whenever you're watching in your daytime or present here in the Zoom room. I would like to first give you some information and some welcome and some idea of the purpose of these sessions for the semester. If you've seen or been present at session 1, you'll have noted that we ended up gathering in a mode that was on the surface a bit academic, perhaps, with 2 fairly long presentations. But this mode is something that we are squarely moving away from for all of the next sessions. The first session needed a quite extensive presentation of the participatory sense-making theory as a reference point for the semester, but we will make the next sessions fully dialogic and participatory, or as much as we can, because for us this is also an experiment and an exploration, as I'm sure it is for all of you. So welcome into that exploration. So the purpose of the whole semester is to bring the participatory sense-making framework and the wider enactive framework into dialogue with intersubjective practices such as therapy, teaching, art, coaching, and so on. We bring these together now because there is a need from each side. On the one hand, for its development, participatory sense-making theory needs engagement with practices in order to become better and more refined as a theory of how we understand the world, each other, and ourselves together. There has long been a strong need and impulse to interact with practices in the enactive approach, and we've also been doing that for a long time. But I think now we want to put that more into practice, let's say. But at the same time, also from various different fields of practice, like therapy, education, even medicine as well, we sense, on the other hand, that there is a need for theoretical grounding and support from something like the enactive approach to human knowing. And so practitioners in many fields tell us that they are now at a phase in the development of their practices where there is a felt need for living logic, lived logic of relational knowing that can inform and ground practices, insights, and struggles. So there is a real chiasmic interaction between the two, between the theory and the practices, if you like. And so we want to make explicit the purpose of this semester to think participatory sense-making through intersubjective practices and to think intersubjective practices through participatory sense-making. And this informs the rationale and the arc of the whole semester and the choice of the invited experts and the work we will all be doing together, participants, every one of you included. And so we will go into ways of gathering now that take seriously this purpose. And so the first session was meant to be both inviting and informative, and we relied on presentations for that. Even though this was the mode, however, of that first session, if you've seen the session or if you were present at it, you maybe noticed that reflection on interactions from a participatory sense-making framework happened spontaneously at the moment when I lost connection. It wasn't intended, it wasn't planned, and it won't happen today because I'm connected via cable today. But we had to improvise at that moment, and several of you participated in that. We did improvise, and people introduced themselves during that moment, which was great. And also some people reflected spontaneously on what that moment could or show or tell us about the precariousness or the robustness of interaction, engagement, and participation, as we both engaged in these interactions and they were also interrupted. And so this was unplanned, but it was a perfect illustration of what we are after with this semester. So we've asked our guest speakers not to prepare a presentation, which I know may be a bit thrilling and difficult and exciting. I would find it very difficult. But at the same time, we want to have these spontaneous interactions, and I invite all of us to just do that as it comes, you know, with all the tensions that that might bring, but also with the pleasure of it, I think. And so, first of all, in this session, we will introduce, after I stop speaking, Leticia will introduce our guests. And then we will have an interview or a dialogue with them. And we have questions that we will ask them to bring out their practices. And then more or less on the hour, we will have a short break. And then we will have breakout rooms with questions for reflection for everybody. And we will also post those questions for reflection on the screen for YouTube viewers. And then we will come back after the breakout room and have a plenary session between all of us. And I should note that if you prefer not to go into a breakout room, please just don't enter the room that you are assigned and stay in the main room, and feel free to switch off your camera at that point and engage in some reflection or journaling or converse with who is in the breakout in the main room as you like. You will have a chance to do what is good for you at that moment. So now, before I give the word to you, Leticia, I would like to have a really short centering invitation to all of you to enter into the room so that we can be present for what we will be doing together as well as possible. So for each of you, you may notice how you're sitting in your chair. You may notice how your feet touch the floor or the ground or wherever you're sitting. How your backside touches the place where you are sitting, perhaps a chair. Your arms rest on it. And as you feel yourself present in your physical room, you may become sensitive to whatever happens to you, for you auditorily, what you are hearing, how the room surrounds you, both in how you're hearing it, but also how you're sensing the room. This is your physical room in which you are present, and there might be a window there with light coming in. And then you're not only in your physical room, but you're also in the Zoom room here with everybody. So if you had your eyes closed, you may now open them and notice and look into the Zoom room. You may see some other people, maybe not all of us, but still you might look at everybody in a gentle, curious way, in a welcoming way, which brings you into presence and also welcomes the other people in the Zoom room together with us today. I wanted to do that brief welcoming of everybody through your bodily presence in this virtual situation. So welcome everyone. And then I invite Leticia into introducing the speakers and beginning the conversation.
Thanks, Han. Thanks very much for this introduction, this explanation, also for this exercise. It's very useful in this virtual situation that we are in. So welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you, and also very happy to receive our invited speakers. So I will introduce Johnny Drury. Johnny's aim is to unite people through dialogue, healing, and the arts. He's creator of the Autism Dialogue approach, co-founder of Dialogica, and trainer for the National Autism Trainer Program in Britain. His coaching, learning design, and facilitation approach draws from a broad range of modalities and life experience, which ultimately recognizes that our interconnectedness at all levels is the key agent for healing and change. He's currently writing the Autism Dialogue Handbook to accompany a new practitioner training program. So thanks, Johnny, for being here to accept this challenge. I will introduce also Alison Lee Holt. So Alison is an artist and a Fulbright scholar who uses techniques of expanded cinema and the light and space movement to model divergent manifestations of mind. So Holt's work has been supported by the Ford Foundation Gallery, Jurassic Resident Artist Program, the David Berman Foundation, San Francisco Arts Commission, Denise Montel Molecular Science Laboratories from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Samati Institute for Art and Society in Indonesia. They have been a resident artist researcher at Sanggar Perbaikkayum. Don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it is in Indonesia. And they have been also in the Santa Barbara Center for Art, Science, and Technology and the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. And their writing has featured in Yale's Theater Magazine, Leonardo Journal, Panorama, and Public Journal. They have exhibited, screened, and lectured nationally and internationally in Latvia, Poland, Indonesia, and at the University of North Dakota Writers' Conference with the sci-fi author Kim Stanley Robinson and theoretical physicist Brian Greene. A current fellow at the Montalvo Art Center, Holt pursues PhD studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute at the United States at the intersection of the neurodivergence, feedback structures, media art, and ways of knowing. So thank you very much, Alison, for being with us, for accepting our invitation. And I also like to introduce Kata Spiel. So Kata is an assistant professor for critical access in embodied computing at Vienna University of Technology. They research marginalized perspectives on embodied computing through a lens of critical access. Their work informs design and engineering supporting the development of technologies that account for diverse realities they operate in. In their interdisciplinary collaborations with neurodivergent or non-binary peers, they conduct explorations of novel potentials for designs, methodologies, and innovative technological artifacts. So, Kata, thanks very much for being here, for accepting this a bit challenging invitation, and for being with us tonight or this afternoon. So thanks very much, everyone. And I would like to start this conversation, dialogue about your practices, inviting you to talk about them, to explain to us what do you do and how do you do it, knowing that we are all from very different areas, from very different disciplinary belongings. So I would like to invite that, and also having in mind the questions that we sent to you to more or less prepare this dialogue. So I will share also with the participants the questions that we sent to you. So the first one was basically that. Tell us something about your intersubjective expertise in your practice. So what you are doing and in your daily practice, how this expertise manifests itself. What do you already see there? What are still the doubts, quests, friction, tensions? What do you still wonder about this intersubjective expertise? And the other question too, I will say both, but we can after go back to these questions. It was, what is at stake for you as practitioners? So in a meta level, about the methodologies, how do you, for example, reflect on how do we do participatory research? What does it mean to do a participatory research? But also in a very practical level, very in a daily life basis. What matters to you? What is at stake for you in a dialogue, as a dialogue coach in the case of Johnny, or as artist or researcher? How do you engage and interact with the clients, colleagues, institutions, collaborators? So these were the basic main questions, but I would like to first hear about your practices. What do you do? So feel free to just open your mics and
Hi, Alison.
Hey, Johnny.
Hi, Kata.
Hey, Kata.
I want to see your work, Alison. Would you
You
like
want to see my work?
Yeah, that
Oh.
piece. Would you like to go first?
Oh, you make me go first. Sure, I will. So let's see. I should talk about how my practice. So I'm a PhD student in my first year, and this is a time when everything just gets kind of very messy and blown apart. So that's happening, and it's also very fruitful. And I'm also continuing work that I was doing prior to and alongside my art practice. I teach experimental film video to autistic folks. So that's something I've been doing for over 10 years. And one of my clients that I'm continuing with, I've been with that entire time. So it's just an incredible, when I discovered participatory sense making, I was like, yes, 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 yes. Every part of it really resonated with my experience of teaching. And that obviously is a very different way of engaging, and the context is different. The motivations of my clients are different than academic students, other students that I teach and work with, but I'm also student alongside of in academia. And I should also say, I really appreciate the term recovering academic. I am the opposite. I am very reluctantly, I'm a reluctant and maybe disloyal academic. And very much feel self-taught, even though I have some education. I have always been very much an autodidact. So, and some of that, may come up a little bit more when we talk about disabilities justice. So most recently, I made a piece called Stitching the Future with Clues. It's a film that is very much a neurodivergent manifesto. And it's mapping my current thinking, and also winds up being an historical overview from cybernetics through 4E cognition in a very poetic 9 minutes. And it's also kind of incantation in that I'm it's a manifesto. I'm stating what I think needs to be done, or how we ought to be now. But that piece is like alongside of the poetic language that I'm using in the piece, because it's narrated. It uses motifs and models and diagrams, animated diagrams, that build its own visual language and is intended to kind of overload the viewer, to sort of subvert any attempt at rational attention, and to be like receiving ideas in somewhat of a way that neurodivergent people can tend to experience things in contexts that aren't designed for them or with them in mind. So it can be quite difficult sometimes in some contexts, certain contexts, for people who are neurodivergent to be present in the same way that like holistic folks are. So this is the work is intentional in that way. So as an artist, I bring attention to things. I make a thing and I'm asking you to tend to it in a particular way. And I'm often, as I mentioned, making models of concepts that I want to bring into being, or diagrams of ideas that are emerging from dialogues. Dialogue is very much central to my methodology. And I make these things and present them expecting the best of my audience as I sort of situate them within and in relation to those ideas. So I'm increasingly writing from an autoethnographic standpoint, as part of my, it's just an important part of my methodology that I'm stepping into now. And I feel like I should stop talking. I want to pass it off to Kata, maybe. I'd love to hear about your practice and how you go about doing it. I think we're muted.
Kata, you're muted. You know, you're making us experience. Yeah, sorry.
But I guess the point has come across. Ha ha ha.
Hello.
No. So yeah, I've recently, very recently, in terms of like we're submitting our first paper to this very recently, like it's work that has been happening over the last few years, where I've tried to also expand. I do a lot of participatory research with peers, as also is still in like my main bio. But I've also been trying to kind of consider how to expand participation, and go into what I would like to call like crip solidarity, specifically, or solidarity in more general. And in terms of practice, I tried my international sign there. I don't know whether anybody else signs. My international sign is shit. I apologize to everyone. It's not very good, sorry. But yeah. My Austrian Sign Language is much more developed. But like it started by me learning the language because I specifically the Austrian one, because I realized at some point I want to work with disabled people and like across kinships, and then I realized I have shown that I can communicate across a vast range of communicative preferences, but that I cannot do sign language, which means with deaf people I would always be reliant on interpreters, and I found that to be lacking. It meant that I, as a researcher, was not accessible. And so I felt or rather like one of my practices, then I went down that rabbit hole and I've been studying it for 3 years now, like at least another year on it. But that also opened up much more stuff than I could have seen. And what I mean with solidarity then is also that I have now, like, most of my research agenda is on topics that I would not have come up with, and that would I, for myself or for my peers directly, would not necessarily be interested in. But it feels like participation always requires to bring people in from the outside, whereas solidarity, sign language is beautiful. But like solidarity kind of like brings you on the same level and like, and allows to go with. And so what I'm trying to do in that enactment, and like I'm not trying to diss anything here. Like I think participation as like a concept that could also be signed like this, right? But in a lot of research contexts is more like this, like bring people from the outside into what you have already established. And what I want to do is kind of like figure out where they are and like move towards there and then go together forwards and bring these things together. And so that's what I do. Does that help? I don't know. But I find it funny that I use my hands so much that people just expect I was also speaking at the same time. Like even when I just do the speaking. Johnny, rescue me.
Yeah, I just noticed your beautiful ring as you were moving your hands around. Can you show it?
Sure, it was a fork once,
Oh, awesome.
Nice.
but it's also extremely stimmy. Yes, exactly. Like it's very helpful. It's also a good signifier because when I interpret, I take it off so people know I'm not me anymore.
Yeah.
It helps as a thing.
My friend said I shouldn't wear my magic rings, and she's never called them that before. I took one off to begin with because I'm not really into magic or anything, and then I put one back on and I thought, all right, we'll have a little bit of magic, and then just now I put the other on. So I don't know what's expected of me right now, dear hosts, but I just want to say thank you for inviting me. Right now, feeling very much that precariousness and robustness at the same time. I'm quite familiar with it, having done 7 years of facilitating dialogues with this madcap idea I had of bringing autistic and non-autistic people together in circles in the community, hiring rooms out. Not so unfamiliar because I spent a few years putting gigs on in Sheffield, experimental music, and after my fine art degree. But yeah, and this also being an organizer, knowing about the tension between these two things, because the instructions, I really wanted to do it right, and I was told to be unprepared and unmediated, which I loved. I loved that, but then some stuff came for about 1 minute here and 10 minutes there, and then I started asking questions. How many slides can I? Well, 2 slides. So I've done 2 slides and I've timed myself, and it's about 6 minutes. And I'm just going to read at some point, but at this very moment, I don't know if that's what's expected. I'm more on the precarious side at this moment, and not wanting to, walk over the sensitivity of getting to know each other and the proceedings, trying not to think about being watched by lots of people. Hello, strangers. I know Alison, I know Hannah well, and I'm getting to feel my way into this environment, but it's quite a first for me, and I am keen to share my work, but whenever's best.
I am listening, by the way. I just have to find masking tape for my kid.
Life goes on, right?
So in terms of like, if you're doing the right thing that is expected, I don't know what they expect of me. And I came completely unprepared, honestly. So there you go.
Perfect.
Well, the thing is, there's the danger with me of being unprepared and unmediated, and I have to learn about letting go again and again, because I get myself in all sorts of trouble. So I need that framework. I've always needed a framework to live by, and I found a lot of allyship in Hannah years ago, and a friendship, and now Alison as well, and this platform.
Thank you for being here, Tony, and everyone. Yeah, somebody says in the chat, I'd love to see what you prepared. I also would love to see what you prepared, and for you to bring your practice in as you prepared it. Yes. After this wonderful improvisation and showing your practice so vividly, Kata and Alison. There's time for your film as well, Alison, later, if you want. But Johnny, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Is that full screen? Autos is the Greek for self or alone. Autistic people much more likely to struggle with poor mental health and consider suicide and commit suicide. And being autistic in itself is thought to contribute to this risk over and above the other typical factors, such as unemployment, isolation, and depression, because they, according to Autistica. Camouflaging or masking is when an autistic person actively hides their autistic traits during social situations in order to be accepted by non-autistic peers. It's important to know that this is a trauma-fueled response in general and not a choice. It negatively affects the mental health of autistic people and associated with high rates of suicidality. And that studies from Sarah Cassidy et al. Here in England. Likewise, camouflaging can mean less support if professionals underestimate an autistic person's true level of distress. Just last week in the UK, a health think tank has warned that the NHS is experiencing an avalanche of need over autism and ADHD assessments and treatments, but the system in place to cope with surging demand is obsolete. There must be a radical rethink of how people with the condition are cared for in England if the health service is to meet the rapidly expanding need for services. They're calling for a whole system approach across education, society, and the NHS amid changing social attitudes and better awareness of these conditions. So the autism dialogue approach is a novel method I came up with back in 2017 and has been working with me on that for the last 4 or 5 years. It safely explores the intersubjective tensions between different neurotypes, chiefly autistic and non-autistic people. Damien Milton's well-cited double empathy problem back in since 2012 refers to a breach in the natural attitude that occurs between people of different dispositional outlooks and personal conceptual understandings. When attempts are made to communicate meaning based in the social interaction between two differently disposed social actors, the disjuncture being more severe for the non-autistic disposition, as it is experienced as unusual, while for the autistic person it's a common experience. As you know, the disabled are more often than not excluded in research through the normative and restrictive understandings of what constitutes voice and a lack of imagined possibilities for how stories might be told, even if they're not voiced. My autism tutor, Professor Nick Hodge, states the lives of autistic people are constructed, constricted, bounded, and disciplined through these stories. And so that's why stories demand our attention. Hannah Eben in 2015 suggests an approach to autism that's not concerned with the autos, which forms the etymology of autism, but with the atopos, which means strange or out of place. The word contains an explicit reference to space, atopos meaning no place, and is the origin of terms like atopia, which signifies a world without borders. Indeed, the word autism suggests existence is restricted to the self, but to be autistic is not to be self-enclosed, but open and potentially vulnerable to all sorts of outside influences. Eben employs atopos as a metaphor to describe the discourse of autism in cultural expressions that contain personal accounts of autistic people. Creative negotiations and crossings of space play a pivotal role. This counter-metaphor offers a new approach to autistic bodies and identities, that autistic subjects may be continually shaped by interactions between bodies and discursive spaces. Most therapy and coaching is agent-dependent and interactional, and professionals face major challenges when interacting across this neurotype divide, possibly even re-traumatizing clients. Many relational professionals are inclined to adapt protocol to account for autism as a collection of deficits, and despite widespread concerns and protestations around the double empathy problem, the lack of theory of mind myth persists. These are some questions for consideration. Thanks.
I'm wondering if we could reshare those questions on the last slide, Johnny, in the chat, because they were so rich, and they can be helpful for us if we circle back to them for the conversation. Is there a way of copying?
Yeah, I can do that, as long as that's not taken as a literal instruction. You may have your own questions rising.
Sure. Yeah, maybe just as a possibility.
I find, just if I may, I find these so good because like they so relate to like the issues that and like to me there's like a new clarity in why I'm so interested in also like, you know, working in solidarity with deaf people, because like there's just a similar kind of like communication and access issue where you're like, you know, constantly getting discredited because you're not using the right modality in this case, but also in my case, it would be more like, you know, not using the right words or, you know, not fully fulfilling status. Though, I mean, to be fair, and in all kinds of reflection, I do now have a very privileged position. I have no idea how it got there, but like, you know, it just happened, and while it's there, I'm gonna continue misbehaving because apparently it was okay.
Yeah, they're very resonant with me. I am going to a polytechnic which is probably filled with autistic people and doesn't care about it. I think I'm like one of the only people that is focusing on neurodivergence on my campus. And there's probably less than a handful of people who have any concern with disabilities studies or justice. And so I am tasked with defining neurodivergence, defining autism, and educating everybody. So yeah, and my inner activist has been activated in my first semester, especially with regards to current events in the world and how my institution participates in them. So solidarity indeed.
Yeah. I was particularly intrigued by this question about this, how the facilitator, researcher, or artist is situated, because we were talking about, and we are living, I guess, also this precariousness or a not so comfortable position. And I was wondering if this is related to the position of the researcher or facilitator to being vulnerable to, or how do you see that or feel that in your practice?
Well, in my practice, it's been very interesting to notice my responses to the position that I'm in as an artist slash scholar slash researcher now, and the expectations of educating everyone, as I just mentioned, which I think we're doing all the time. We're always educating everyone. We're educating one another right now, but when the onus is placed on me as, you know, essentially in a minority to do the work for everyone, I just noticed my response to that. And then sort of embracing that and taking it back as an opportunity to deepen my work and my practice and how I identify and what my definitions are, and how these things actually inform what I do, how I'm doing it, how I'm relating with everyone, the impacts that it has. It's changing my attention to myself and like bringing up that autoethnographic aspect of what I do a little bit against my will. Like I sort of suffer from past definitions of autoethnography, even where it's considered whatever, navel gazing kind of thing, but it is in fact a way of subverting state-sanctioned sources where I am, as Hannah says, an expert. Beginning from that place is very empowering. So this is like a constant thing in academia now, right? Where I have to be subverting it, so that I remain the expert, that I maintain that sense, and I engage from that place, because I don't think that it's intended for us to, this is one of the most powerful aspects of participatory sense making to me. And it's actually quite emotional. For any neurodivergent person, for anyone with disabilities, it's a very emotional thing, because especially for folks, I think, where your disability is invisible, you can present like you have your shit together and be expected to behave and produce and, contribute to the project that doesn't care about you, doesn't have your best interests at heart at all. So all of the questions that Johnny's put in the chat are beautiful, and I hope we can continue, kind of coming back to them as we go.
I feel like there's a bit of a elephant in the room sort of situation. I'm usually quite open of that nowadays I say I met the criteria. I don't use the word diagnosis, but it was 10 years ago now, and it was known as Asperger's, or something was, and then it was removed from the DSM. But they said you can still use that. Anyway, blah blah blah. But when I first started doing these groups and facilitating this, had this idea, there was quite a lot of excitement, but also personal conflict, and I felt I was perpetuating this myth and I was dealing with my own denial for a couple of years, and then there was dealing with the stigma, and as I learned about it, went to uni and learned about it, and I was doing started an MA autism, but had to drop out because of the horror stories that were triggering. Learning about stuff that goes on in the States, they still use electric vests and whatnot to keep loonies on the path, right? But as you were talking there, Alison, I was thinking, I got a question about whether the tortured artist, comes into it a little bit.
How so?
I don't know whether that's like because it's a bit of a cliche, but it must be something that goes through your mind, that where do I fit as an artist, as a creative with
in society? How do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all changing quite rapidly. It's my second semester. So, and I'm 52, right? So I'm older than everyone. There's like 2 other people my age on the campus.
We're going to be friends. Well, you've actually been responsible for influencing my decision to go back and do a PhD.
Oh, good. Oh, awesome.
I'm a lot older than you. So
That's
we're going to have to be friends. But this whole thing about research, work, life, there's no division, and I get, I think that's how things used to be more anyway, and it's something to do with that fragmenting of things that's partly responsible for the confusion.
Well, as far as actually, like, I don't know, doing what I'm doing on this campus, I don't know how that fits into how everything else is done on that campus. I think that I'm interested in, those like computer science fields and the engineering fields and the ways they're expected to work, the ways the people are practicing what they're doing and the methodologies they use. It's very collaborative. It's necessarily collaborative. And in the humanities, it's it's a little bit like an ivory tower expectation, that the way you go about doing what you do, the like generation of knowledge that you're expected to do is isolated. And so the arts is the arts PhD that I am, the program that I'm participating in, hews toward that model. And that's not really how art is made. I don't think that's how anything is done. But I'm again, like I'm subverting that, or working toward ways of working that do subvert that, because and that goes back to like where your sources, what kinds of sources you start from. And I'm super inspired by a recent talk by Charisse Burden-Stelly and Orasami Burton. We might talk about that a little bit later, but Orasami Burton is talking about how like Black radicalism is totally not understood by the state. No understanding of the motivations or goals, anything. And so how that kind of the work that's already been done that needs to be, I guess, translated through academia, the work that's already been done on the street by people, humans that, civilians, needs to be translated through someone or through, a theory or into a language that can be made into canon for people to, talk about and share in this context, because academia is this all controlling kind of platform of knowledge, like where knowledge is legitimated and valued is there. So Orasami Burton is talking about subverting that and considering the body as a source of knowledge, scars on the body and letter writing and things like this. So it's just incredibly, a lot of the inspiration that I draw from is in Black radicalism, just because it speaks to me. When I have an emotional response to something, that is, it is like a language that resonates with me, that means something, and I follow that. So so that has been something that's just been very helpful in the last couple of months to help bracket my experience and how I go about my studies and plan for, the direction that things are going and respond to things. But disability studies also, I mean, it's like, there's so little difference I see, they're very much kin. So yeah, Kata, a lot of the stuff that you've been saying really speaks to me also.
Yeah,
Cryptech is.
Thanks. I'm just
Yeah.
defaulting back to the idea of being practical and useful in the world, and that's why I opened with that slide.
Yeah.
If we could, if alleviating somebody else's suffering is what I'm here to do, then, yeah. But then the question is, can I claim agency in that? That's the caveat with that question. I'm lucky that Sheffield Hallam University, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, fabulous fine art degree, a lot on that's where I was introduced to bone dialogue, actually. And now they've got a lot of multidisciplinary stuff with artists and creatives working in health and cultural change. And there's some really interesting research opportunities. So I hear you there, and I feel strongly compelled to work within that framework, but I feel like I'm being dragged a bit as well, like, because I want to be divergent. I want to really be properly divergent, naughty kid, like Kata saying.
I think there's a way of, I don't know, integrating the two, if it's necessary. I mean, sometimes it's good to maintain, separation. But Kata, I'd love to hear about your work. We looked at some of, Johnny presented some slides. Do you want to talk about your work?
People said I shouldn't prepare, and then I didn't prepare.
You don't have to do anything.
No, it's fine. So I did actually, because Miranda said, I don't know whether that related to anything, because I do admit I checked out at some point for a minute. Warned you this would happen. Like that's the other thing why I need caption. Auditory processing is hard, and so sometimes I check out. Anyway, so I'm not sure whether that's in response to anything. And I'm sorry if I completely derail the communication now, but this is also exciting, I feel. Like, I don't know. Nobody knows what's happening. I'm like fine with unpredictability as long as it's like truly unpredictable and not that there's like, like a hidden agenda that I'm actually supposed to. And I'm taking you seriously and like literally in that you're excited in just what happens. So if that is not the case, you should have told me. Anyway, so Miranda says, I remember reading something about successfully exploring using robots to engage with children with autism, with the ways in which they were more predictable, providing more of a framework that helped them adapt to the unpredictability of some aspect of human social interaction. Now, since I do have a teaching kind of like gig as well, I am less frustrated about the teaching stuff because I always feel like I have a public mandate. So let me just say, a few things on that. First of all, I did a lot of reviews of technologies in that space, so I feel like I have a good overview of what happens in the context of neurodivergence and technology, and usually it's not great, which is sad because like everybody else gets great things. Why don't we get great things? Like everybody else gets to play for fun. Why don't we get to play for fun, but rather we get to play for work? What is that? Anyway, so I'm just mad in a lot of ways. But the other like another thing. Okay. I'm just gonna say that there are people who prefer with autism. There are also a lot of people who say they're autistic. Just just so you know that there are different preferences. I'm not sure what the background is of this group that is essentially listening, so I'm just gonna mention it. And at least I find it weird if you say with autism. That's a personal preference because like it's not something you kind of like you buy and then attach. Like I'm with tattoos, this is fine, like they're also part of my body, but like yeah, but like it feels like so detached. And I'm really sad about like other stuff where I kind of like I can say I'm a diabetic and people are not getting mad and saying you need to see yourself first, which is interesting. And I'm sad that I always have to say with ADHD because like we haven't found a great thing to say that yet. I'm just trying, yeah, and I also like neurospicy just to say that this, like, there is something happening. All right, so, and then towards the communication stuff. So the thing is, with employing robots in this case, is that I don't know how this makes sense. In a lot of ways, and I'm going to generalize over how emotions are taught generally. It's like you get cookie cutter emotions. Basically, like you get a set of 5 that the machine can reliably do, or maybe 10 if you're lucky. And then people are like, and this is also how therapy works. So this is not a uniquely technical thing, but like this is also how often therapy works with autistic people. And they're like, name all these emotions. And then what people don't understand is that it's not about recognizing them in a lot of ways or like understanding them. There might be misunderstandings, don't get me wrong. But there is also a huge part is that I always feel that the words we have for emotions just doesn't match with how I feel this, because there's much more complexity involved than any kind of like this one-dimensional, like, do I feel sad? Sure, but it's different. Like, yeah. I feel emotions are much more nuanced than the words we give them, for example. And so I'm mad that like essentially what is taught is that you have to reduce them. And then when you use like these 5 or 10 emotions in that way, people are like, but they only use those 5 or 10 emotions. What does that mean? So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It makes me mad. And so it doesn't necessarily work when you also provide like, of course there's an unpredictability of some aspect of human social interaction, and it always is. Like at least for me personally, that's not the problem. The problem is when it's not actually meant to be unpredictable. But like But also like with the interactions, right? Like then you expect to like how would that logically work? So you teach a child how like a social interaction works and give them a script. And that is also happening a lot in therapy without robots. And you give them a script and then they follow that script. And then people are like, but they follow that script. You taught them that script. So in that regard, really glad I got late diagnosed because like nobody taught me any scripts. Maybe that would have helped, but like, you know, it's like in other ways of understanding things, and I do like it when things follow a certain script and like roles are clear and all that. That's not it, but like it's not always the case, and I can like at least be personally, I can totally live with that. But and I can hold a lot more nuance than a lot of neurotypical people seem to be able to hold, I feel, if I may say so. Anyway. So yeah, I don't know how this should work because it ends up being like, you know, oh, and this like this is like then they also say like this is communication starters, and then when neurodivergent people just sit together and like play alongside, this is like bad now because you can only play with each other. It's the highest form of play. Who put this hierarchy on play? I don't get it. It's like super nice to sometimes just sit next to each other and do different things. I'm in rant mode now. I'm sorry. But like so yeah, I don't feel there is a huge benefit of like trying to like simplify this in terms of like then especially if then in the rhetoric it's kind of like turned against autistic people of like, oh yeah, you followed this specific like, you know, script that we gave you, but like why do you follow that script so strongly? Like, what do you want? Like you get then kind of like reprimanded for that. I see you, D. Forster. I'm just gonna go through these comments real quick. So play becomes therapy, yeah, with just kind of like you have to work for play because like I feel if you have 40 hours of therapy a week, then that's work. Then there was like language discussion. Okay, you just go ahead.
Okay. I just want to make a few comments from some of the work that my colleagues have done. My background is in actually as a primatologist, being around non-human primates, so you spend a lot of time doing nonverbal communication. But my colleagues who work with people on the autism spectrum, what I understand from them is that the neurological machinery of producing and experiencing emotions are very tied together. So typically, if you can produce something, you also are better able to recognize it. So part of the work behind, let's say, using robots or technology interfaces is to actually encourage kids to produce emotions that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with when they're in face-to-face interactions, and to see if that production then also helps the perception and understanding of it. So there's some interesting pathways that way. I also totally agree with you. Parallel play is actually the way kids first start. So 1 to 2 year old kids are mostly doing parallel play. It takes a while until they actually engage each other and face to face, and that's a wonderful way to be together. But if you want some references on some of these attempts to get production and understanding, I'm happy to give you some pointers.
I then wonder why they don't have any safe people to explore emotions around, but like that's another topic, I assume.
I think what they find is often, and I guess, you know, autism spectrum is huge, right? And there's all levels and stuff like that. But they find groups of kids that actually feel more comfortable with an iPad, sitting next to a human and doing stuff, and then turning and feeling safe. So the face-to-face is not always a safe one. It also seems that people don't, so people on the spectrum don't look to the upper side of the face. So where you express confusion and stuff like that, they tend to look to the lower side. And sometimes such just gazed training also gets kind of this whole loop going.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I need to say something.
Yeah.
I think that those are broad generalizations, and they really don't. I've worked with many
That's right.
folks. So
I don't mean it as a generalization. I meant there are groups of people that.
Sure,
that is
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and there are just like as many different kinds as there are people. So in and I've experienced some of Johnny's dialogical sessions, and it's also wonderful to have Zoom to be able to be together across time zones like we are right now, and to just be autistic folks in the same space and not have the expectations to produce anything. In the classes that I taught, I call it neurodivergent media, at a time when the word neurodivergent wasn't really something that was in the lexicon. The focus of the people are coming together, young people are coming together, and I taught adults also, but they're coming together to make film. And the films are what they want to make. Sometimes they're a single person's fantasy, you know, something that they just went through their mind, a vision that happened in their mind that they really want to make real. So we go through all of the process of filmmaking, you know, storyboarding together and creating roles and coming up with creative solutions for realizing their visions. And we do it together, and everyone focuses on the medium of film together. And that medium of media is magic. For them, it's like a way of, when you go on a hike together and you are not looking face to face, you're walking down the path together. You know, you're sharing a rhythm, you're sharing a space, you're sharing the environment together. And there's not a requirement for you to participate with one another in this kind of structured, like face-to-face way. You know, the hike is kind of a medium. It is a thing that you are traveling through that's informing you, you know, like there's much we can say through, you know, enaction that is occurring there. But the same type of thing is happening in a collaborative situation where you're making a film together. And because everyone is invested in this process and also kind of seduced through Hollywood to be like, you know, there's importance, there's like a value of yourself when you can see yourself in a film. You know, when some people really hate being in front of the camera, other people are just like, you can't get them away from the lens. So this you know, more than 10 years of experience of working in this context has been an incredible education about myself, for sure, because I instantly resonated with my students' experiences and immediately thought like, oh my God, this has got to be, they're like, I'm them, they are me. These are my people. So I still have not been diagnosed and you know, am now required to go down that path. But while teaching them, just all of the aspects of communication come up that would come up anywhere. But we have a medium to deal with that communication through, right? Everyone wants to make the film. And they, in order to actually succeed in doing it, including editing and screening it, all of it, and considering the audience's experience of what they make, right? They have to cooperate with each other. They have to expect the best of each other in order to get through the process. So it's not therapy, right? It's art making. So, and I really don't consider it art therapy because I actually have zero experience with therapy. I'm not a therapist, I mean to say. And it's just been extraordinary to see what what the folks that I have worked with can do. People who don't have very strong hand-eye coordination, doing cell animation, animating, frame by frame, and making incredible work. So just had to say that, all of the things that come up in conversation and in like behavioral stuff, I just think that if autistic folks have a context in which they can be, where there's a role that they're playing that has some importance, I think that I just think that the pressure of fitting into the constructs that we all struggle with go away.
Yeah, it's a pity to interrupt the conversation at this point, but I would like to invite you to have a short break, and then we can come back to continuing the discussion and also with the participation of everyone in the room. So if it's fine, we will take a 5-minute break and we will come back.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. As we all come back into the room, we've had some conferral in the background about what to do next, because the discussion has been or the conversation, the dialogue has been so rich and transforming. And we really felt it was difficult even to interrupt it. We promised breakout rooms, but I think we're going to decide against it and maybe take it to a next session. We promise it'll happen someday, but it's all an improvisation and an exploration. But I think it's really, and we agreed with the team that this is really worth continuing. And so we would like to invite you, Alison, if you like, to share your film. And then from there to continue talking with each other and to invite all the participants into the conversation at that point, after you show the film.
Sure.
So welcome to take part.
So I'm going to show a work in progress. It's clunky, but I'm very proud because it was hard to make. I mentioned that the film that I talked about earlier, called Stitching the Future with Clues, I have shared with Mind and Life before. I'll make it available to everybody in the chat. You're welcome to watch it at your leisure. So I mentioned the piece uses diagrams, animated diagrams, and different kinds of modeling to describe neurodivergent sense making and 4E cognition. It does some different things, and one of the motifs that I use repeatedly throughout the piece is this sort of particle generator. It's like a cloud of dots, an animated cloud of dots that is representing different things at different times, but most often it's representing the sensing and processing of information in dialogue between agents in dialogue, or even between yourself and your environment. So I'm interested in visualizing that so that to bring attention to it, so that when we're actually in a conversation, that we can imagine that there's a body that we're generating between us, that the conversation itself in this sort of third space between us actually has its own characteristics and wants and needs and a form, that by imagining it, we can tend to it a little bit differently. And I actually tried to do this yesterday, day before yesterday. I filmed a dialogue with a friend, and I am creating an animation to do that visualization. So the animation will be brought in to the film, the recording of us actually sitting across from each other and talking, which we actually recorded in 2 different places. So I have to composite them together, but we will be sitting across from one another in chairs. And between us, we will have this animation that I'm about to show you. So it was quite challenging to do. It was surprising. And the conversation that we're having is about dialogue. So I think that this is a series of films that are called Dialogue about Dialogue about Dialogue. Let's see if I can share. And I'm going to let's see, when I click share screen, I see one participant, multiple participants, advanced screen sharing options. Oh, here we go. Got it. Okay. So this is clunky. It is a murmuration of spheres of glass filled with water. And if you imagine it behaving like this between 2 people sitting across from one another and responding, playing in at the speed that they are having an exchange, you know. So the exchange may go from person to person a little bit slowly or differently, or, you know, not at this particular rhythm. I have to have some work to do with this animation. And sometimes the 2 people may struggle to be on the same page, so to speak, and the animation may be much less liquid like this. It may be way more, you know, disjointed or messed up. So that is something that may occur also. And I can stop sharing. So this is just an attempt at like creating a visualization of interbeing. If you can imagine that murmuration, and if everybody knows this term murmuration, it's like flocking behavior, right? We talked earlier about taking a walk, that going on a hike, 2 people together, that it's quite different than facing one another and speaking. If you can imagine walking together in an environment and seeing that murmuration occurring everywhere between yourself and the environment, between the environment, different aspects of the environment and itself, that, you know, this is possibly a future goal for a film, but also possibly AR. I think that AR is something that is quite powerful for like revealing what's already there. So this is a goal for making that murmuration as well. So in the next month or so, that's the completed film that you will see is me sitting across from my partner in dialogue, talking about dialogue and talking about these this information that's being sensed and processed and exchanged between us as actually having a body, and how that provides us, what that opens up for us, and how it helps us, you know, imagine ourselves and imagine our relationality, and like enter into a process of interbeing, being able to imagine it everywhere we go a little bit more, providing a medium for that kind of thinking. A counterpoint to that, because I think that this is something, this is what I want to bring attention to. This is what I want my audience to tend to. And I also want my audience at the same time to tend to the forces that wish for us to control us and prevent us from that. It's equally important for, and I really appreciate this aspect of Hannah, your work with Ezekiel DiPaolo, that you bring political awareness to the work as well. It's really important to me. And so there are features in our environment, there's features in the architecture that surrounds us that are symbols, messages, language that is working quite to the opposite. So I'm also making work that brings attention to those things. For example, in the post office in the town where I live, there happened to be decorations around the ceiling of the building. It's decorated with swastikas, and I don't think anyone knows. So that's extraordinary. And I believe that this is an aspect of neurodivergent thinking that I look up and I see them and I'm like, oh man, they're looking down on all of us all the time. And I can almost guarantee you, like, the majority of people who have lived in this town their whole life don't know that they're there. So that's another AR project, bringing attention to the swastikas that surround you in the post office.
Thank you so much, Alison, for that.
Sure.
For the film and your thoughts and what you're doing, saying more about what you're doing. I do, for participants, are there any burning clarificatory questions, like basic questions about, because I realized the conversation has been high level neurodivergence informed and from lived experience, and we might not all be following it. Are there like basic clarificatory questions of ideas, concepts, terms used that are burning within you and you would like to have an answer? I'm sure you are not the only one. So if you do have a question like that, please feel free to ask that as well as react to or participate with other questions in the dialogue.
Maybe we can also go to gallery view at this point. Is that okay with you, Hannah, Letitia?
Yeah, I already have. Totally.
Okay, so anyone who has a question so we can see you better, and feel free to come.
Mm-hmm. So Half has a question.
First of all, I want to apologize for arriving late, but I forgot you were on summertime over there. So I programmed for coming in at 2 o'clock Rio time, and in fact it's 1 o'clock. Sorry about that. Yeah, Alison, I maybe because I've missed a lot of stuff today that I have these questions for you. It seems to me that what you're doing there is you're representing graphically participatory sense making, certain sense, you know. And if you take the model developed by Hannah, Ezekiel, Elena, this is quite far advanced in that model because it's dialogue and involves reciprocity between the people and recognition of the other and all the rest of it that's in the analysis in linguistic bodies. But I wondered why you were calling it information processing. Isn't information processing a rather odd term here? Because that leads me to think that what you're focusing on is cognition as some kind, or sense making as some kind of information processing. And I thought that, enactivism to a certain extent is trying to get away from that model. And I was a bit interested in why you called it information processing.
Maybe I'm thinking of it in a much broader definition. You could call it ideas or knowledge, or you could use different terms for what we're actually exchanging when we're talking. But I guess for me, it's just helpful to just use to call it something, that there is a body for what is actually being exchanged, and so I mean, I appreciate that, and I don't I understand that it can come across in a way I might not intend, but I hope it makes sense. I don't know, maybe you have a better idea for what it might be termed.
Sense making?
Well, I mean, the actual stuff that you're sharing, when we're communicating, I use information because it seems like we are exchanging something, and that it has a form. So, yeah, like this, I don't attach this, maybe the same kinds of meaning to the word information. I'm thinking about it in a super broad way. Yeah. But I hear what you're saying. I could probably preface it by saying that. It would be helpful. But I'm totally open to other ideas of, what you might call the actual body of what is communicated.
I just want to add, I'm just thinking, I wonder, because Ralph, you weren't here for the first half. There was a little bit of I think there was a sense of shining a spotlight on narratives of power and oppression of neurodivergent people, and there's Alessa mentioned a little bit about for the audience as an artist for political awareness, and so there is a stated intention behind that, as far as I'm aware. You might have missed the nuance of what we talked about earlier. I'm not sure. Miranda's got a hand up. I'm happy to shut up now.
I can't hear you, Johnny, very well.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry for not getting the camera on, overtired today. Thanks so much for telling us all about your work. Really excited to see that murmuration flow of energy. But I do think that what Ralph was saying is an important point, just in terms of, sort of postmodern views of what happens tends to see us all in terms of sort of socio-cultural forces and allied the material aspects of being. And I think that is a really important aspect of what enactivism gives us. Historically, so I've looked at sort of ideas about the mind historically, they used the idea of spirit because they saw that as a sort of physical thing that flowed out between different people. But I guess, mind as well is sort of another alternative, but mind in a not metaphysical necessarily sense. But I think it is definitely worth thinking about more, and yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks. And so do I take that to mean that you would suggest using the term mind to describe the what is being exchanged?
I would, but I think that would be something you'd have to think about how that fits with your sense of the experience, I guess.
I might need to invent a word.
Yeah,
maybe it's sprites.
Yeah,
something.
I do like spirits, and I think if we can sort of reclaim, you know, like Philip Pullman has, like, you know, the animal spirit, so as that's a sort of more material manifestation of them. So the way that it was used in the Renaissance, I think is quite distinct. But yeah, I've been trying to develop an idea, which I'm terming fission fusion, taking it from physics, which kind of builds on enactivism, which is also about sort of thinking of the self as a cluster of entities that extends across time and space. So it kind of goes with your visualization as well.
Yes.
And it helped me imagine that too. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for your comments too. I don't want to hog the mic, but there was something else that came up from what you just mentioned, and it was from a hike that I actually took recently, where, and it speaks to this, what you were just describing, and it speaks to participatory sense making in the sense of bodies and boundaries and what we are using to communicate, and the differences between us and our environment. And I'll just read something briefly. My first thought as I sit in the redwood duff here, I'm enjoying the overripe grapefruit and swatting insects. My first thought is that if I died right now, they, the insects, would be making my body home within minutes. That the only thing really preventing this body from being absorbed whole and in parts by this immediate place is my reflexes, swatting, and my various biological systems working in unison to maintain their current functions. That if those things stop, even briefly, the boundaries between what I call me, or rather my body, and one of the things that I call me, and the environment is a matter of perspective. If I'm a process involved in larger processes and host to those at smaller scales, then my behavior is just determining the ways my system functions in tandem with these others, like a flowing, churning community of purpose-driven occurrences, expressions, contributing to and reinforcing the others I come into contact with by choice or otherwise, that my thoughts and manner of sensing, processing, and exchanging information drive those behaviors. That humans will only get noisier, this is another thought, that humans will only get noisier and more vulgar before our numbers really begin to go down. All of the environment as bodies, parts of bodies, a branch from a redwood sculpted by insects in scalloped lines and curves. Here you go, I'm done with this, you can have it now. Body parts. I'm imagining the limb falling off of the tree and becoming part of the forest floor. Every work of art, every gesture is an invitation, a seduction. Here's one way you can do it. I want to work to be a deliberate seduction. I want my work to be a deliberate seduction, a prayer, a plea, an enactment, a summoning. It was a moment where I felt was imagining my body and the place that I was sitting in, the boundaries, how porous the boundaries are and how quickly they could change if the things that this process, if this process ceases to do what it's doing now, then it will just be absorbed into the environment.
Alison, would you by any chance be willing to share your text at a later point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In the chat or on the Slack, maybe afterwards?
Oh, yeah.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll throw it in the chat.
Can I come in again? I'm sorry, I don't want to, if there's nobody else immediately at the moment, because another thing that really interested me, actually,
there are literally two more hands up and one just got down because you kept on talking, sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go to another person to ask a question or to come into the
Yeah, if
conversation.
we have time, we can go back after. There was someone else.
Mary.
Please don't give up, Mary.
What I was wanting to say, I'm a little hesitant, right? But Allison, that's so interesting what you're doing. And I couldn't possibly do anything like that. But there's something I'd like to see. And what I'd like to see is the piece you just read us, fullness of that in images as you did the other. And in the other, could you also integrate some way the body is engaged in that and how the empty part isn't void? So I don't know if I'm clear what
What's
I'm
the
trying
empty
to
part?
say. The empty part is like there's movement, the bubbles movement or what movement between, but they're within a space that looks void. But it's just from your description of the other experience, I know it isn't void.
Yeah, I
It's
wanted to
empty.
clarify that. Yeah, thank you. And I take that. Your suggestion is well taken and definitely on my mind. It's a big challenge.
Yeah,
But
sure.
just that murmuration, what you called bubbles, this is going to be superimposed onto the film of the two people talking. So that will be it's a 3D visualization, right? It's just something that will be layered into a dialogue so that you see it happening between people. Like if you and I were sitting across from each other in a room, then it would actually be there between us.
So there'd be actually the environment,
That's
not
right.
some symbolization of the environment.
It would, yeah, it would
Just
be an actual video of us talking, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary and Alison. Prashant.
Can you hear me? Okay, so
Yeah.
I have two questions. I'm not sure which one is more appropriate in this setting, but the first one is kind of more about things I've studied in cognitive science. It's maybe too theoretical, but maybe I'll start with the second one. Then the second question is how, when we talk about neurodiversity and autism, for example, I appreciate that there's a need to not talk in pathological terms or pathologizing terms like like a disease that you have to cure and so on. It's more of a difference in the person themselves. But how then do we account for the difficulty or the disability, if that's too strong a word, I don't know, but I tend to find that from experience, from my own interaction, I feel that there is some scope for a genuine difficulty with the neurodivergent situation where the person, not just in social interaction, but also the person tends to have more difficulty coping with certain things like managing your time, for example, or regulating your own self and things like this. So how, while I appreciate that the need to talk in terms of differences is better than disabilities, how do we account for this? What I tend to think is a genuine increased difficulty or challenge with coping with kind of living contexts and situations. I'm curious to hear any of the speakers' thoughts on this.
Yeah, Hannah, can you kind of bring that into a little bit more of your domain? Because otherwise, I think we're going to go off on something else.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was looking behind the scenes a bit as well. I saw that Kata has thoughts on this. If you don't want to bring them in, that's also fine. But if you want to, please.
Oh, It's mostly just that I don't mind the term disability. I will also call myself as disabled in specific situations. It's fine. Like it's also like I generously call myself learning disabled because it confuses the hell out of people, and I love to see their face. But also that helps me in other contexts, like when people come to me and I mask really well and they have not realized I'm neurodivergent and they talk to me about their neurodivergent kids and I'm like, well, and so am I. And hello, my name is Professor Dr. Blah. You know, it comes off as like cocky, but also they're like, you can see the relief in their faces of like, oh God, like this is not a death sentence, basically. And like this is maybe also the difference, right? And that's what I mean a bit when we say disability should generally not be pathologized, because it's very contextual. It's very like I follow Alison Kafer here a bit, different Alison. But like with the social relational model of disability where it's a contextual happenstance, like neurodivergent people among each other, that's less disabled if you want to, because it's like it feels less of constant bumping against stuff but more like, you know, smooth. Like I also realized at some point that just having heard, like having been immersed in what mostly Johnny and Allison have been saying, I completely forgot myself, and I'm very sorry towards the person that I interrupted, but I was just like, well, you just said like if there is no one else talking, and there was literally someone else talking, and I was like, oops. And now I feel bad because I'm not sure that was received in the way that it was meant to be given, which was just like, here's a piece of helpful information that you didn't seem to have. Sorry. I also realized it could be understood differently, which is very rude. Anyway, so is that like that can have ramifications, such interactions, right? I have now explained it with the incessant need that I always have to explain my communication needs, because I have understood that if I don't, people will interpret it in the worst way possible. And even explaining it might not kind of solve that, but you know, it might. So that's why I keep doing that. For example, like, and I feel there are quite disabling aspects, but they're super, super relational. And that is in a lot of contexts. Like if you would say, I mean, diabetes is classified as a chronic illness, I would still take it because it's something else that I share that, you know, people do never question, which is funny because like when I say I'm diabetic, nobody says you don't look diabetic. Well, and it's not just because I'm fat. Sorry. But it's like, you know, also thin people, like it's not like you don't look diabetic, like nobody questions that, which is curious to me. Don't understand that fully. Anyway, but the thing is like, this is like something that people acknowledge as a thing that exists and that I can have, right? And so, and I have disabling aspects to that in terms of like that specific food baskets are just like not gonna happen for me, or like, you know, I actually don't go to a lot of shared outings because I have kind of, you know, I have to manage when I eat what a bit more than other people. But that's not necessarily the issue. I feel the issue might be more that we kind of like rely on that for networking, which I also hate, but like that's a different thing. But that also that the kitchen and the Austrian culture around food is highly carb based, and I just don't want to, you know, account for all of that all the time. So, you know, that is also a disabling event, but like it's not necessarily something that is the case when I'm at home and like, you know, making my salad, which I have next to me. But like, you know, so and in that regard, I feel like a lot of disabilities, like yes, there are like bodily differences. And I would argue that all of them are, even though I'm not having experienced all of them. But that is where I come to like disability should not be pathologized as such, because like, you know, while there are advantages of like I don't know, even like, you know, meds that I take, of course, like there are advantages that I have to do that, and it's not that, you know, I don't want to like interact with my body as well and like change certain things and how they go because they might give me a longer life, which I fully acknowledge is the case, but that doesn't define me as a person. And what happens a lot is that when it comes around disabled people, at least this is like what I've seen and like what comes from how I read about these things, is that we mix the two things. We kind of mix the thing of like, you know, here is an opportunity for like, you know, I don't know, body hacking is how you call it when it's done by not disabled people, or like, you know, well-being. But like versus here is something that is an actual barrier. And so we kind of like mix the two together and individualize it on the person and say like, you need to function better in ways that we kind of like don't really tell you how. At least that's been my experience. So I don't mind the term disability. I'm not sure whether I'm answering a question at this point, but like, I don't mind the term disability. I'm fine with that. But I don't think pathologizing is helpful. I think there are other ways to acknowledge that there is something that we can do in kind of like modifying our bodies. Body modification is also like such a cool term that I do all the time, but like, you know, it's not acknowledged as such. It's meds.
Well, I wonder, Prashant, do you think that there was something about, there was a question about neurodivergent experience actually being difficult in ways that we might not acknowledge as much when we talk about neurodiversity? Is that a question that you're saying? Okay. And actually, well, I wanted to say I wanted to speak to that a little bit, and just in terms of the standards that we use, in terms of like managing your time, you know, executive functioning, those kinds of things. That has to do with how we structure our world, and the sort of, I mean, what I would call like a tyranny of time that we're living under now, that we didn't live under just a little over 100 years ago. So this is a total construct, and it has everything to do with neurodiversity when it comes down to it, and your liberation. So part of the issue of neurodiversity, this is the political aspect of neurodiversity, is that, you know, when we talk about crypt time, you know, it's much closer to like mythological time. It's not something that's living by the clock. It's a biological thing, you know, and you deserve that too, is the point, I think, of speaking in terms of neurodiversity. But I hear you. I've had this conversation with Cliff Saron before. Hi, Cliff. And some of the folks that Cliff works with are much more profoundly affected by autism and require help, more support in recognizing when they're thirsty, you know, in order to do something about the sensation that they're having. May not recognize that it's actual thirst that they're experiencing. So is that like a part of what your question is? So there's a big difference between that kind of like struggle with understanding what your senses are telling you, you know, how to respond to what is happening with your body.
Yeah.
And
if I can clarify, for clarification, it's something like, if you haven't slept enough and then you wake up sleepy, then generally I think it's possible for most people to say, I'm not feeling quite okay because I haven't slept enough, or something like this, where in the autistic context that somehow doesn't, that's what I meant by self-regulation, in a way, like not being able to,
someone might not know that that's what's up,
or they feel uncomfortable, they feel cranky, but they don't somehow take charge of that different feeling and navigate it usefully or effectively. And I appreciate what you say, that you some people might need more help to navigate, and that's kind of exactly what I'm asking about. That's what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that there's just a question about like what you need help doing. Do you need more help living under the tyranny of time? Because that sucks. I think that you deserve to, I think that you deserve more autonomy in yourself. I think everyone deserves more autonomy in that regard, and to not be expected to produce according to a standard that, you know, is not real. there's no real like ideal human, you know. I don't think that it's fair that we're all expected to be functioning according to a particular clock. So there is a bit of a difference in, you know, the expectation that you're, you know, expected to meet.
Also, like, that seems like an unrealistic illusion of control over our own bodies. You do know they sometimes do things without us wanting them to do them. Like, but that is maybe, I mean, I also learned that there's a cocktail effect at some point. And I was like, that's a lie. People kept on telling me that it's existing for most people. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And that's how I learned I have auditory processing disorders. But, you know, I do think that we do not have full control over what our bodies do because, like, they get sick, for example, rude, but like they do that, right? And I mean, what you just said reminds me of that thing when people are essentially like, but like when you're ill, it's basically your own fault. And I'm like, no, it's not. I'm not responsible for viruses existing. I'm not responsible for like the reactions of my immune system. Like if I could control them, believe me, I would do different things, right? Like, and then if you're like, but like, why do you like, and I mean, I then take precautions, like I take some days of rest and like let my body do its thing or whatever, like when I'm sick, and then, but like, and then some bodies can have like different, like my body has a difficulty regulating the hormones, the insulin hormones, for example, right? And then so. But then I act on that, but like also that doesn't always work. It's like not a smooth experience either. But the point there is like if I then like don't regulate my emotions that well one day because I'm so occupied doing something else, how is that immediately a problem to fix? Like, can you sometimes just be grumpy? Is that fine? I don't know. Like, I just wonder what kind of like the norms are playing in there. And also, like, there's a lot about emotional control. Sorry, I think we're over time. But like, there's always a lot about emotional control when it comes to neurodivergence that you have to control your emotions. But I don't feel very comfortable about that because, you know, the reason why I'm angry much more often is because I do honestly feel that the world is more hostile towards like my peers and me. And so I feel that is a natural response. Why is it my problem then to regulate my anger, for example, right? Like, again, there comes the interplay between your environment and like what is expected of you, but like from which footing that comes, so to speak. And then I also don't want everyone to have to be productive all the time because that's not how we define our worth.
Yay. Yay, in fact, yay. Really, I think so. Yeah, we are indeed over time, but we're gonna round it up now. I really so I think I should say a few words just to like bring participatory sense making or bring it in the terms of participatory sense making. And the quickest way to do that is to say that we all act out of our concerns from the bodies we are, and we bump into each other with that. We struggle with it. Our participation in social dynamics pulls us in or pushes us out in different ways. These are the simplest ways to directly say in active terms what we've talked about. But for the first time in my time thinking about this, I really feel challenged even about these ideas. Like I think it's much too simple. And I've been, and at the same time, I do think it captures in these simple ways what's going on. But I also, by all your what you've talked about, Johnny, Alison, and Kata, and also what you've done in the way you've spoken and interacted with us, I felt pulled into things that I actually realized afterwards, oh gosh, I did that wrong. And then something else happened. Yeah, okay, Kata goes like this. But that's also part of it, right? So that we are invited in ways, but when that happens with struggle and with real that brings then about real change and transformation. So then it's not just any more information exchange, which I agree is part of how we can describe this well, but it's also transformation, and that runs through our bodies as we are invited to participate. And I feel that this really happened, at least for me, in this session, and I'm extremely grateful for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hannah. And I agree, it's a real challenge. And it's a joy to be playing and experimenting this way.
Yeah. Yes, the struggle, but also fun in there.
I was
Yes.
hoping, I was kind of imagining and hoping that you just somehow magically extended this conversation for another hour, and I just missed the plot. But, yeah. Thanks, everyone.
These are like baby steps in I don't know, evolving participatory sense making.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
it's wonderful.
Also, just for the people watching us, the irony you experience right now is the difficulty of neurodivergent people actually disengaging from each other. Which is ironic, as well as me asking a rhetoric question, because like supposedly it's not something we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm experimenting this difficulty too. And I just wanted to say that as Han, I'm extremely grateful. It was very, very intriguing and inspiring to hear you all talking about your practice. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Letitia. Thank you, Mind and Life Europe.
Thank you to everyone. And just before we sign off, I just wanted to close. I think we just had a title, an end slide to close. And once again, to really just join my voice to Hannah's and Letitia's, to thank the three of you, Johnny, Ellison, and Kata, for helping us stir this collective pot of our minds, which really felt like just a beginning in this conversation. So I also wanted to say that we do have a Slack channel for participants in the live Zoom room and for faculty, for our guest speakers. So please take advantage of that space if you want to keep the conversation going. And there were so many comments in the chat. I realized we were not even near to being able to bring all of them forward. So that's another space where you can keep bringing your ideas into the space. So we'll be meeting back here in just a week's time, actually. So next Wednesday, the 17th of April, our next session, which will be on our next verb in the series, healing, with a focus on psychology and psychiatry from an inactive participatory sense-making perspective, of course. So we'll see you back there for this. And we also have some other programs coming up, which you can read about on the slide. We're launching our podcast, which is very much about a dialogic participatory sense-making approach to encounter and interaction. And then also our summer school, the European Summer Research Institute and Retreat, which we're hosting this summer. Applications are open until the end of this month. So just want those things to be on your radar, and we'll see you back in just a week's time. Thanks to everyone this evening. And thanks again to our wonderful hosts, Hannah and Letitia, as well as our guest speakers once again. Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day or evening.